Governments secretly all around the world have tested humans in the past, testing twins and triplets, to people who are left-handed, to human radiation experiments. All done without the knowledge of the public. Project MKUltra is a mind-control testing program which took place over many years, by testing their patients with different kinds of drugs to try and get the upper hand in the Cold War. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at 3 subjects about the Project MKUltra. The victims of MKUltra. By any American ethical standards, the MKUltra project would surely be turned down today, at least we would hope. However, in 1953, at the height of the Cold War, the US government was desperate to gain headway on the Soviets and all other opposing forces. MKUltra sought to alter an enemy's psyche to gain control over them. In other words, the US government and CIA were working together to use mind control in war zones. The CIA used numerous drugs that they believed would assist in the mind control project, such as LSD, MDMA, heroin, methamphetamine, and psilocybin, also known as magic mushrooms. CIA scientists thought that these drugs would revert its victims to a childlike state of dependency, rearing them incompetent of performing warlike duties that would ultimately harm the US. However, these drugs needed to be tested before using them as a weapon of war. The CIA used some volunteers and some unknowing Americans to test the effects of LSD and other drugs. In one such case, Phyllis Goldberg lost her entire sense of self, sense of family, and ultimately her life by being an unwitting test subject for the MKUltra project. After checking in at a mental institution to seek help for some mild depression, Goldberg's life and free will was snatched away from her. She was a patient at the Allen Memorial Institute in 1945 when she came into contact with the CIA doctor, Dr. Cameron. Dr. Cameron was hired by the CIA after outstanding credentials as both the chairman of the World Psychiatric Association and creator of the psychic driving technique. This technique aimed to erase schizophrenia completely by erasing memories and experience from the psyche. This technique didn't work. Goldberg checked out of hospital unknown to anything around her or herself. Unable to walk and barely talk, it was down to Goldberg's niece, who would take care of her in the coming years. Her niece reported that Goldberg was a completely different person. She reported that her social reactions were completely out of the ordinary and nonsensical. Goldberg would flinch and squirm when her family tried to pat her on the head in an endearing way. At first, her family was confused as to why Goldberg had this reaction, but then they realised she probably went through several bouts of electroshock therapy, which can sometimes be used to treat patients with depression. Additionally, Goldberg would laugh when there wasn't anything to laugh at. Other patients of Dr. Cameron would later come forward and recall the same experiences. In total, patients suffered a complete loss of personality, reverting to a state of childlike dependence, amnesia, and incontinence. Many of the families of affected people have chosen to pursue legal action against Dr. Cameron, the Allen Memorial Institute, and other MKUltra villains. Though they have been given a sum of money for their troubles, it doesn't seem like enough. These families were completely altered after the MKUltra tests. They've lost their loved ones, had to take care of their loved ones, and been duped out of a sense of security in their own country. The repercussions of this kind of illegal project are insurmountable and are a product of war, time, fear that American citizens should have had no part in. Frank Olson. Frank Olson's mysterious death associated with the MKUltra project lives in infamy alongside other US government conspiracy theories. Frank Olson started a promising career as a biological warfare specialist for the CIA. He worked out of the US Army Biological Warfare Specialist in Maryland. Olson was an outstanding contributor for the CIA and the US Army, until his own run-in with the MKUltra project. Olson was unknowingly dosed with a concoction of LSD and potentially other substances as a part of the MKUltra motive for mind control. After suffering from an LSD trip lasting several days, Olson plunged to his death from a 10th-story window in a New York City hotel. There's been much speculation about his death since then. The official report on Olson's death is marked as a suicide. His family and friends don't believe this. Often, when a loved one commits suicide, the family is reluctant to believe that the person they loved would voluntarily leave them in such a tragic manner. However, in this case, Olson's family might be right to suspect foul play. Because Olson was so heavily involved in the business of controlled substances in the war era himself, the CIA might have had reason to get rid of him. People suspect this because Olson wasn't unhappy, and because he wasn't the one to take lethal amounts of untested drugs on his own. Nonetheless, Olson was used as a poster child for the US government's war on drugs at the time. The government, namely President Nixon, was heavily concerned with the lethal potential of hard drugs and the unknown repercussions of hallucinogenic drugs. To incite fear into many Americans, Olson's death was used as government advertising for the lethal effects of drugs like LSD, magic mushrooms, and more. In this sense, the US government was intent on perpetuating the idea that LSD killed Olson because it's a deadly drug. However, they ignored the data and scientific testing done on drugs like LSD, which prove in most cases that LSD doesn't cause violent behaviour or self-harming attitudes. In some cases, hallucinogens are used to cure depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder when used in microdoses. Scientists who test these drugs have told the government that they would only cause such violent or self-harming behaviours if the patient had pre-existing mental health conditions. There's not yet enough research to prove exactly what effect LSD will have on the brain of someone with pre-existing mental health issues, so it's hard to draw conclusions about exactly what motivated Olson to jump out of the window. Olson was another unwitting victim to the MKUltra project run by the CIA and US government. Though many other victims lived after being dosed with hallucinogenic drugs against their will, Olson won't ever get his life or legacy back. Why was MKUltra started? The MKUltra project started as a response to the Soviet efforts to defeat the Americans in the Cold War. American governments and armed forces were fearful that their Cold War opponents were using mind control tactics. This was to torture and elicit confidential information from American prisoners of war. In a perfect world, the results of MKUltra would produce the ideal concoction of drugs which would act as a truth serum for the US government and CIA to use on its own prisoners of war. Of course, the government never found its perfect match. The project was shut down by the CIA in 1973. MKUltra used 150 test subjects to test the effects of drugs they thought could lead to mind control. However, many of these test subjects were illegally and unknowingly dosed with a mixture of drugs. Test subjects for the MKUltra project were often found in mental institutions where they were being treated for something else entirely, like in the case of Phyllis Goldberg. Patients would check into these hospitals, and instead of getting the treatment they needed, they were subjected to electroshock therapy solely for testing purposes. MKUltra experiments were also present at universities, prisons, hospitals, mental institutions, and other places of high human concentration. The point of this was to avoid suspicion and attribute any adverse reactions to pre-existing illnesses. It was extremely difficult for officials to track exactly how many patients were tested during the MKUltra project. Many mysteries remain about the project, including exactly how many people were tested unknowingly, what kind of compensation they can get for their troubles, the results of the testing, and the trauma that was induced because of it. So what do you make of these subjects around the project MKUltra? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, and help us by growing this community whilst working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.